All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome as always to the Project on Ethics and Political Communication. My name is Peter Loge. I'm the director of the project. I'm honored to be joined today by former governor of Montana. We'll get to him in a moment. In the meantime, as always, this is live. I am recording it. I'll post the link online realistically tomorrow by the time we get around to it. I'll email a copy of the link to everybody. Share widely. The Project on Ethics and Political Communication, as most of you know, is run here out of GW. The goal is to promote the study, teaching, and practice of political communication ethics. We do this by hosting conversations like this one. I teach a class on political communication ethics, write in the political and popular press, occasionally the academic press, write case studies with the University of Texas at Austin, try to produce material for classrooms, give talks. You name it. In fact, actually, I'll be out at Montana State University end of March for a part of a series they're doing in public space and how the public commons, our politics is actually part of our public space. So I'm looking forward to. I know you're not in Bozeman, sir, but looking forward to seeing your beautiful state pretty soon. So with that, let's get to the governor. Let's do the governor. I'm thrilled to welcome Governor Marc Racicot. Hopefully, I pronounced that correctly, sir.
That's just perfectly fine.
Excellent. Um, I'm looking over because I'm reading your rather long bio from a piece of paper here. Started your career as Army JAG, became a very successful prosecutor across the state of Montana, elected Attorney General for the state of Montana, elected governor, chaired the Republican National Committee, then later rebuked by the Republican GOP for endorsing Biden. And most recently, you've joined as chair of Republicans for Integrity. Welcome to the conversation, sir. I'm excited to get to it.
Well, I'm delighted too, and anxious to be able to talk with you as well.
Folks, if you've got questions or thoughts, please throw them in the chat. In the meantime, sir, I'd like to start with Republicans for Integrity. It's a terrific, relatively new group. You're the new chair. What should people know?
Well, I'm only a co-chair. There are other co-chairs as well, and it began at the urging of Senator John Danforth and Senator Alan Simpson and Senator Bill Cohen. And as a consequence of their entreaties, I decided that I would be a part of the Republican legacy issue and trying working to bring back what we understood to be the party of Lincoln and Reagan, that is quite disparate from the party that we see today. So I agreed, and we've been working at it ever since.
So what does that mean? You recently had a convention or a meeting here in the DC area. What does the organization do? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, we are getting engaged, first of all, and spreading our wings as far as we can. And we have chairs in 25 different locations, different states around the country. We offer commentary and review of what it is that's taking place and continue to build the scope and breadth of our membership and to get engaged with a focus upon elections and trying to once again inspire people to subscribe to the party that all of us knew of when we were members of it prior to the time that any of us have been rebuked.
Well, let's get to what's going on in the world. Some things that probably deserve some political commentary. There was a rather lengthy speech earlier this week in the well of the House here in Washington, D.C. What are your thoughts on not just the most recent State of the Union, but for the past decade or 2 decades, what's been happening with the State of the Union address?
Well, generally, very good question in my judgment, because I think it's moved far, far away from the language of the Constitution that says that the article that allows or gives the opportunity for the president to offer thoughts is actually a requirement, but it's specified that it'll be done with all degree of seriousness and that it'll be focused upon urgent matters that are to be brought before Congress. But it has taken on over the course of the last years a certain carnival atmosphere, and as a consequence of that, doesn't appear to be on the surface nearly as serious as what the Constitution contemplated. And when you have people engaged in it trying to set the stage with erroneous and sometimes untruthful allegations, you end up in a situation where its credibility is dissipated over the course of time. So I think probably a great majority of the people of this country, me included, would be desirous of seeing a return back to a written report to Congress with a list of objectives that the executive branch thinks are important to be accomplished.
I love that you just happen to have a copy of Article 2 just kind of lying around. I mean, it's important to remember that the Constitution just says the president will inform. President Washington gave the first one in person, but then President Jefferson thought it looked too royal or too regal and refused. It wasn't given in person again until the early 20th century. Wasn't given in prime time until President Johnson gave it in prime time. President Nixon clocked his in at around 30 minutes, which was not the case earlier this week. Anytime every review of a speech begins with longest ever, there's probably not a great review of the speech. So, one argument for an in-person State of the Union is it's kind of a civic ritual, right? Where the House and the Senate and the President gather in the hallowed space of the well of the House to discuss issues. But you're saying it's too much of a circus and we should just go back to a written report.
Well, if it were my judgment that was dispositive, that would be my ultimate judgment. I thought, appeared to be more of a game show than it did a serious discussion about the issues. And it was laced and saturated with inaccurate, untruthful information. And as a consequence, it's very little help to the people of this country when they go to cast their ballots to make a decision based upon facts and information that should lead them to a conclusion that's realistic and, focused on some degree of credibility offered. My notion was it just appeared as if the president was the master of ceremonies, offering exaggerated comments about virtually everything. And as a consequence, it's a very little help to people. There's a gotcha element to it. The drama and the outrage that is exhibited inside that hallowed hall that you referred to, I think, is a desecration of what was intended in the first place and steals away the seriousness of what this particular discussion ought to be.
How did we get here? How do we go from President Washington to what we saw earlier this week? And we've seen not just President Trump, but for the past couple of decades, it becoming more of a rally with props, both on the president's side and also members of the House and members in the gallery. How do we get here?
Well, I think it's a process that really accelerated with the invention of social media and the internet. And as a consequence, it was not all that, it wasn't a lone choice, and as a consequence, the drama and the carnival atmosphere of it and the barking that takes place and the disrespect that occurs, I think over time was probably starting to develop, but it got great speed attached to it as have gone through the last 15 years or so dealing with social media and trying to entertain rather than to make certain we're focused upon serious issues for the people of this country.
Well, entertaining though apparently works, right? Candidates, you know that you've been a very successful candidate. You've got to meet the voters where they are. You got to do what the voters want. And if elected officials do this and voters applaud them or, keep sending them back, how do we get back from that? How do you get to a point
Well,
where boring is effective?
that's actually one of the focuses of the our Republican Legacy Group is to bring integrity back into the processes of government and to once again try to remember why it was that our founders settled upon a tripartite government with a certain amount of friction that exists between the various branches to try and create a circumstance where the truth was ultimately perceived and proven, and then to focus upon the public good. So the notion that we do this because it works is not what I think the founders had in mind. The accumulation of power is not the objective of serving in office. What is the objective is serving the public good. And frankly, this is a consensual form of government that we are engaged with. We consent to it. Nobody can order us to do it. And at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of honor that is infused into the document itself and expected as a result of what it was that they were focused upon doing for the country. That means some moderation, some recognizing that you're not going to get your way every time, that you have to listen to others with the same respect that you hope for from them, that you speak the truth constantly without exception. And so what's happening is ultimately you tear apart at the seams of that agreement that we have originated in 1787 and of course amended throughout all of these decades. And you tear apart our ability to remain unified, which is one of the goals of our Republican legacy. And that ultimately leads to pretty disparate and sometimes almost carnival-like atmospheres that do not seek the truth and try and represent a country that really, for its fuel, depends upon the truth and upon working with each other and reaching across the aisles. It doesn't mean it's a compromise of principle, but when you take a look at what it was that occurred on both sides of the aisle last night, or the night before, excuse me, um, it was inexcusable, and it's they get so engaged in the context of their own self-importance, and then thereafter hiding out in the shadows of darkness, so nobody can find out what they're doing or why. It doesn't take long, I don't think, Peter, to realize that you can have a situation where the entire system falls apart. And I think that we're facing that existential possibility right at this very moment.
You raise a lot in there, and I want to pull on one thread in particular that you've talked about in the past, which is the ability to reason together. The democracy requires us to reason together, which, as you say, doesn't mean an abandonment of principles, but it means standing for your principles in ways that move us together, move us forward together. You also, though, mentioned the role of social media. Everybody is encouraged to have an opinion, and express that opinion and express it immediately. And then you're rewarded for having outrageous opinions. How can we encourage voters or candidates, or how can I encourage my students to be better at reasoning together and worry less about sort of the circus or getting likes or clicks or always shouting?
Well, I was blessed in many ways in my career because I began running on a nonpartisan ballot. And I probably come from a mixed political credential basis in my own family, with my father being a very strong Franklin D. Roosevelt Democrat, and my mother, best I could discern, was more inclined toward a Republican or conservative approach to the issues of the day. Thereafter, I got engaged in more than one judicial election, which are nonpartisan in the state of Montana, although that's being attacked as well by the far right. And I lost all three of those elections. And frankly, when I looked back to try and take account, I realized that the people that I wanted to work for were right in their judgment. And having tried so many jury trials across the state of Montana in the Army to begin with, and then as a state special prosecutor, I also realized that really like what we do with the investigation of science is what happens in a court of law. And that was designed to not only happen in the court of law, but in the halls of government generally. Produce the facts, first of all. And I never had to put up with the internet, nor of social media. I didn't even have a computer in my office the day that I left office. So we had to depend upon human communication. And the testing process was produced by journalism that had a much slower pace and performed their function of cross-examination of what public officials were doing in a way that was designed to produce the truth. And in addition to that, we have, I think the institutions of government uh, building off of this social media consciousness have realized that yes, indeed, we have created an atmosphere where we don't know what to believe or when to believe it or who is espousing it. And as a consequence of that, it's distorting that scientific method. So what do we do? I think what we have to do as this democracy continues to fall apart, and it is falling apart, is to try to get back to those fundamental principles. And that's one of the things that the Republican legacy is seeking to do. It may sound to be a bit extraordinary and perhaps not realistic in the minds of some. But in my experience, traveling around the country for the last 3 to 4 years, there's an overwhelming share of the population that has grave concerns about what's going on in this country. And they actually fear that it's falling apart. And as a consequence, and not knowing what to do, how do they stop it? How do they get engaged? It has been slow to develop the opposition to this particular series of events. And so, but it's taking hold. The screw is turning. You can see evidence of it here and there. Take a look at the polls. I saw a poll just recently that indicated that the American people, 17% only of the American people trust the government to do what's right. And of that 17%, only 15 believe that they will do the right thing most of the time, which leaves 2%, an almost indiscernible ability to account for that small number, who believe that the government does what's right most of the time. So we have this horrible confidence difficulty with the people of this country, and they're just learning to deal with it and keep up with what's going on with the frenzy associated with media. And as a consequence, they're somewhat lost. But you're also seeing a huge amount of pain that comes about as a result of running government in this fashion. And as you know so keenly, it has not been the first time that we have confronted the possibilities of the disappearance of our sacred union. I mean, the Civil War was probably the most graphic example. But you take a look at the pain that's being influenced now through the immigration wars, with what's happening economically, what's happening to the cattlemen in Montana who are getting beat about the head and face with cattle prices, or the grains that are shipped from our state to all parts of the world now being secured from other places because of a crazy scheme associated with tariffs, which was one of the reasons the Revolutionary War was fought in the first place, was the tariffs. So there's a lot of pain out there, especially with things like the big, beautiful bill that steals away the opportunity for us to take care of each other. There's also compassion built in to the Constitution. And now we steal $1 trillion out of the funding for feeding people and providing them medical care so that we can provide greater tax breaks to those at the higher end of the income scale. And that income scale is becoming more vast and disparate. And as a consequence of that, there's grave concern and sometimes angst and anger over what's happening in this country. So our failure to live by the mechanisms of government with, as you say, an ethical consideration for the virtues that are infused into it and that are dependent upon the thing working in the first place, puts us in a very, very, I think, existential crisis.
Having read some of your writing over the past few years, I thought you pulled no punches with your pen. You were holding back when you called the big beautiful bill a betrayal and that rural America was sacrificed. You're better live, sir.
What's that?
You're better live than you were on paper. Now, recently, when the organization gathered here in the DC area, you talked about presidential candidates in 2028 is what I read in The Hill, which is one of our local political newspapers. Are you looking at weighing in the elections?
You know, Peter, I take it more closely and more urgently, perhaps, than many people. I don't think we have a lot of time for us to squander. And as a consequence of that, I'm going to look for anything I can that's ethical and moral and focused upon facts and truth to try and convince my fellow Americans that we have to do something now. We had opportunities to address this, and frankly, somebody screaming like a carnival barker at the State of the Union message that the other side is crazy and other epitaphs that are the least bit charming, not very funny most of the time, and leaving a gaping hole in the opportunity for people to bridge the gap, to reach across the aisle, is the kind of thing that's destroying us. And so I'm going to address the issues I can, and any place that there is friction built into the Constitution, and it's there, as you know, purposely and knowingly, saving the separation of powers, and for a chief executive to critique them and to detest them and to defile them time after time after time, and also to do everything from ignore the Constitution to the law of war, to the taking of lives in violation of the pact that we have made with civilized nations. I'm going to point those things out because I don't think they're fit for office if they're not inclined to be as ethical as they are cute. And at the end of the day, I think that's how I'm going to go about it. So I'm going to weigh in, as long as I have the breath to do it, on everything I possibly can after thinking about it carefully, basing it on facts, because I know with any impeachment at all, that there's no opportunity to offer anything of value to the people I live with. And then, in the spirit of the Constitution, set about to try and redefine and reinvigorate and rejuvenate the document and the focus upon the public good.
Love that answer. So, I have access to a lot of really smart students here at the George Washington University. Other people who've registered for this are from Emerson College and schools around the world. I'm going to be in Bozeman talking to college students in a couple of weeks. What do me and my fellow professors who teach political communication and politics, what do we tell our students? What do we tell them to do?
I think we tell them to be active. I mentioned to you earlier, and I'll try to be much briefer than I typically am. I apologize for that. There was an opportunity to do the right thing for the right reasons during the impeachment inquiry, and it was missed. The members of Congress didn't rise to the occasion. They didn't focus on the truth. They didn't do the right thing. So we move on with our government and the mechanisms of maintaining integrity having been corroded as a result of that. We then had another discussion about whether or not the president was even entitled to file for reelection. And my review of the history and of the documentation and of the law clearly revealed that, in fact, that was a judgment for the states to make on an individual basis. And the effort to try and thwart that by the United States Supreme Court, I think, was a horribly, horribly, decision to make in a circumstance that was so critical. So these things have been taken away as opportunities to keep the system healthy, strong, and focused upon ethical considerations. What we have left is what we had in the beginning, and that is the people. It was the people who created the opportunity for us to come together. They realized after 180 years after landing on the shores of Virginia that what they had with the Articles of Confederation was nothing. They had a friendship relationship. And as a consequence, it didn't work. And thereby, after having gone through all of that pain and agony for 180 years, they sat down in a room for 89 days. And over time, even though some of them came pretty cranky and ordinary, they ultimately settled upon an unbelievable form of government that we have been trying to breathe and take care of and love for the last 237 years. So it's not that we're incapable. We are very capable if we commit to a set of ethics and a set of virtues that are infused into the Constitution. And where do we look now that these procedures for regulatory reform inside the government have dissipated? We look to ourselves. We look to each other. We look, and I know I can feel the discomfort that's coursing through the veins of the American people. They know something's wrong. And what I would encourage those students is to take a position, study carefully, employ the ethical considerations that you teach, focus upon the problems at hand, demand facts. Don't form any judgment until such time as you have all the information you can possibly secure. It takes work, it takes hard work. But at the end of the day, That's how this free coalition that we have stays alive. And without it, if we're going to let people get away with lying and cheating and stealing and threatening and disobeying the Constitution, we are going to end up losing our democracy. It's just that simple. When you have people that cannot respect each other, that can't communicate with each other, who deride each other, who corrode the system day after day, who hide out in the dark of night in the shallow recesses of their government offices and won't have town hall meetings, won't listen to the people who want to talk to them, you know you're on the verge of a revolution and it's not going to be pretty. So then you add the pain to that from people who are hungry, people who have been abused, people who have been killed, and you end up with a volatile, explosive mixture that can blow up right in our face. And unfortunately, this president fuels that day after day after day. It amazes me at the outrages he can invent and purvey for virtually every moment he's been in office. So I would tell him, get engaged. It's your life, it's your world. I'm 77 years old, and I don't know how long the road is, but for as long as it is and as long as it lasts, that's what I'm going to try to urge my neighbors to do. And I do see some movement. You know, in California, with the referendum after the cheating that was implemented to try and, expand the number of people in office, I hear about this accumulation of power. What good does it do if you have no program to have the power to do nothing? And, I think that what we're seeing is people finally changing. They lined up, when that change in the maps for congressional districts was worked in Texas, and then they moved to California, and they took the bull by the horns, and there were millions of people that lined up, even though they knew this was only to contravene what was going on with the everything that was happening to try and manipulate the system in Texas. They lined up for blocks and blocks and blocks, and they cast 4 million votes, and they won with over 2 million votes. So they're not sitting on their hands. They just don't know precisely what to do, just like your students. Get engaged, talk about it, write, give speeches, urge your friends and neighbors, talk to your family. I mean, I've had to spend as much time talking to some of the members of my family as I've done anything else. I'm sorry to be so long.
Sir, as somebody who moved to Washington in the mid 1990s to work for Senator Ted Kennedy, I am newly inspired, and I would welcome more conversations like this. Great advice, not just the part where people should study, but they should get engaged, talk to folks. The stakes are high. I think what we have, the American promise, I think is pretty special, even if it's never achieved, is worth striving for, moving towards a more perfect union. Thank you very much for what you're doing. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Thanks for the work with Our Republican Legacy. I look forward to keeping in touch and hopefully seeing you win.
Anytime, and thank you for coming to Montana. You're going to love it. It's been particularly beautiful these days. So we'll give you a break from all that snow and welcome you with open arms.
Take you up
Thanks
on
so
that, sir.
much.
Thank you again. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'll send around a link shortly. Stay tuned for the next interesting conversation from the Project on Ethics and Political Communication.